Hey everybody, and welcome to another scenario playthrough video. This is episode 2 of Razor Rocks. Now you might be asking, where is episode number 1, since this is the first one that I am posting here. This is actually going to be a partnership build with Andrew from MickanMan's RCT station. If you are not familiar with his videos, you absolutely should be. I'll put a link to his channel in my description below, because he does some of the best scenario playthrough videos, in my opinion, that anybody's doing out there. Just the aesthetics are out of this world. Absolutely incredible. So he had reached out to me a little while ago about doing a collaboration, and Razor Rocks is a good one for this. The requirement is to have 10 different coasters with an excitement rating of at least 6, and there's no time limit for that, so we can take as long as we want, and the idea is we're going to pass it back and forth to each other and kind of work on different sections, going to give each other some suggestions along the way. So he's posted episode 1 in his channel. Again, link in the description below so you can take a look at that and see what was built so far. We're looking at it right now. So we've got this really great start to the map with a cool entrance here, sort of an oasis with some of this rock and different trees and things, and then ducking underneath the railroad here, kind of Disneyland-esque. There's a couple of things here on the entry portion. We've got the nice little observation tower here at the end of this long midway. A little crooked house here. Since I'm still, at the time of recording this video, I am still playing the original scenario playthroughs, or the original scenarios for the first game. I'm kind of not used to some of the other elements that you get, like the crooked house or the splash boats that we're going to see a little bit later, so it's kind of nice to have some other things to build with, which I'm looking forward to doing as we get a little further into this. As we go over this way, we've got our first coaster over here, which is a side friction coaster, very reminiscent of Leap the Dips in Pennsylvania, and nicely stacked here, and a couple of figure eights, and actually a very nice little coaster and a good way to get us started in the map. The other one over here is our double swinging inverter ships. Now you know where I get this from. Andrew's great at this, so good start there, and a cool path layout around the whole thing, so it's kind of a little plaza here, or a big plaza, I guess. And then our last ride that's currently sitting here is our splash boats here. This is called Splashdown. I like this little kind of pre-lift section there, just for something a little bit different. But if we zoom out a little bit, you can see we've got a fair bit of land to work with here. So Andrew's tasked me with doing a Zero Tivoli custom junior coaster, so that's kind of what we're going to do. You may also notice, too, that I am playing on the original game. So this is the original RCT game, so not using open like we've been using for our scenario videos. So it's been a little bit of getting used to, because there's definitely a lot of things that we're using that are sort of easy button or quality of life upgrades that open has brought to the .sv4 file format. So it took me a little bit of getting used to just in general, but it's been kind of fun, and play back to some of the original, and definitely some things that are bothersome, like block breaks and things like that, but that's just part of it, and I think this will be a fun one to do. So let's get into the time lapse, and let's build ourselves a junior coaster. So this is going to be a fairly short time lapse, because we're just really building the coaster and some landscaping around it. We're not doing full park or anything like that. So Andrew's suggestion was that I build kind of in between the observation tower, the splash boats, and the swing inverter ship. But as soon as I saw this plaza, I knew I really wanted to do some interaction with it. So we're going to start right in the middle of our layout by building this kind of long sweeping turn around the whole thing. Now, Tivoli custom coasters like this have, or Zero Tivoli custom coasters anyway, have a very meandering kind of layout. So we're thinking stuff like Jaguar at Knott's, or some of the ones at the indoor parks like Mall of America, where they just kind of go around and meander a little bit. Now we are going to add hopefully a little bit more interest here with a couple of helixes and some other things of that nature. So working kind of through that here to build in both directions. I used the one rock there for a little bit of interaction. I thought it would be kind of cool to be going down this sort of ramped drop as you're gaining speed, going into this little tiny tunnel here at the very far end of that drop. So that could be kind of a cool effect to start. We're adding a couple of these helixes, like I said, and raising up our overall height so we get enough space for it. Using the original game, I've got to make a nice long station here because I don't have brake run or block brakes to dictate kind of how big our train can be. So it's a little bit of getting used to for me, but it's the constraints of the game, and I'm okay with that. A little bit of modification to this first rock. I don't really want to do a ton to it, but I did want to use it for the brake run just because it lined up fairly nicely here. Obviously no diagonal brakes, and we are going to go back through and put a little hump into that ending diagonal section, but even still, before we even had diagonal brakes, we'd still pretend by using that as a kind of brake run element. Pacing-wise, it's not too bad. There's definitely some slower sections, but that's kind of okay in general. Got this kind of nice opposing helixes at the end, and it's a reasonably long enough layout that we should be just fine. Looking here, waiting for our test results, and not too bad. Nearly to 6 on excitement, and our scenery is going to get us the rest of the way, so not super concerned about the task at hand. Now really it becomes more of a layout standpoint from pathways and everything, which I do enjoy doing. And part of the fun of this collaboration, I think, is going to be working together with Andrew's style and my style to really make one kind of cohesive whole. You'll see here we're struggling with money a little bit. One of the things that I hadn't necessarily paid too much attention to here was that some of these that were originally charging quite a bit of money for these other attractions were now just not having any queues. So rather than having a couple of people pay a lot of money, we were just having no one paying any money. So that was kind of why we were seeing some issues here initially. But the nice thing about this scenario not having a time limit is that we can kind of take as long as we want and kind of go into this with the mentality of let's just spend the time that we need to make the money that we need to build what we need. So that's why I didn't really skimp on this coaster layout. I was pretty happy with how it turned out. Here you can see that extra little bump that we added in there. And then as far as the overall theme goes for this, Andrew kind of started this whole oasis thing at the entrance there with the train station, but I wanted to carry that a little further along and use some of the Egyptian pieces as well, just because the ruins are really great for just kind of added little detail and crunch. But of course, what's an oasis without the actual oasis? So part of this is a water feature here that was probably a little ill-advised when we were struggling a bit for money, but so it goes. I wanted to make a pretty large lake here that pulls from the water ride here and kind of ties that into the junior coaster as a whole. So as we get along and slowly build up some cash here, we'll lower this whole section. One of the things that I did that I don't typically do is the water is actually the same level as the landscape surrounding it. Usually I do it one level below, but in this instance, A, it saves a little bit of money to not have to deal with going another level down, but B, I feel like when we have some of this thicker landscaping and everything, it kind of hides the edge of the pool, so it feels a little more like it's still slightly below your landscape or your other surrounding landscape, and you're not about to flood out everybody, but it still kind of has a decent look to it. So while we wait for some money to finish up that pond, we're going to do some fencing here with the block from the Egyptian theme and also the mesh. Since we have some very low to the ground sections of coaster here, we definitely want ourselves a bit of a ride restricted fence. So that's what we're going to do there, and we'll continue that through in a little bit. Here we see finishing up the section of pond here, so we're about where we need to be, but the guests do need some food and beverage over on this side. This will help us generate a little more revenue as well, so that gets us a drink stand there, and we'll add some other stuff into a little later. I do want this pond to kind of roll up underneath of the water ride next to it, only because it just kind of makes sense to me that the water ride would have a little bit of a splashdown pool. I mean, in your head, this could be almost the retention pond for that ride. So I think that makes sense to me. I'm not going super heavy on the Egyptian theme, just in case we want to use that for like a proper theme in another section here of the park a little later on. Being the desert, it kind of would make sense, but I am going to use some of the fencing and some of the ruined pieces just to give ourselves a little bit of detail here. So you can see us adding in the landscape here with some of these bushes and also the changing of the textures. So I feel like desert themes are often kind of hard because sometimes you just are not really wanting to change to grass, for example, because who has grass in the desert, but an oasis like this is going to be irrigated and it's going to be all right. And while I'm not using grass specifically, I'm using the dirt and grass. I think that's an easier transition from sand over to that. So we're going to use some of these flowers. We're going to use some of these a couple of bushes. We're going to really build it in here, not in too much of a regular form, so it kind of feels like it's almost a little wild. And we're going to change up some of this land texture here a bit. Unfortunate that we don't have the RCT2 landscape blending, so it's a little abrupt in some sections, so it's a little kind of harder to do this patchwork look without it feeling, totally off, but we're going to do the best we can on it, and I think that'll work just fine. Continuing to expand that pathway as we wrap up filling our lagoon here. A couple of more fences and everything else, because we've got some great low to the ground sections here. Would make sense for us to highlight this area with some pathways circling around the coaster. I always do like to focus on some sight lines and just make some more interesting spaces and everything. Here's where I'm starting to layer in the ruin pieces, just because it's a good look. I think these were sort of the original kind of crunchy detailing pieces, I suppose, in the game, so it makes sense for us to use them. Also bring through these flowers. I like this kind of light pink. To me, that one's always kind of a nice look. Complements the sand very nicely because it's fairly light in general. But it complements the whole thing quite all right. We are getting a bit of pathway debris here that we're going to have to work on with our handyman placement. So I'll go ahead and adjust that as we do it. But now we have a fully filled lake. Adding a little fountain there to give us some other interest on that side, and a couple of more fences here, and we can kind of go through and mess with our plazas a little bit here. I am changing the plaza type from the dirt to the cobblestone, only because it's a nice change in the actual path, and it does kind of call out those plazas as sort of a like staying point, I suppose, where you're kind of meant to linger and hang around a little bit, as opposed to the dirt paths, which are more about delivery to the next area, for example. So we're just going back through here and adding in a little bit of theming kind of throughout, and then now we're going to continue carrying our pathway up and around. So we'll create this nice little loop of pathway here. Not a big fan of dead-end pathways when we can avoid it, and this one makes plenty of sense to me, and also sets us up to expand further out into the middle of the park here a little later. We're going to fence this whole thing so nobody's going to get run into by a coaster, which is generally considered a good thing. I also am lowering this section because I don't necessarily like track on the ground. Granted, the junior coaster is one of the few ones that I think is more permissible to sit on the ground because of the way that the track I-beams are shaped, but I, in general, don't really love having that, so we're going to lower this whole thing and then actually kind of line this nice little trench with some rock on the bottom and then some of this Egyptian fencing here along the edges of it, just to give it a little bit more detail. We unlocked a donut stall, and that seems like a great thing for this little plaza here, as is a restroom on the other end, and we'll hide that a little bit with some fencing too. So wrapping up here as we go through with a couple more pushes, a couple more ruins, and just kind of really trying to take this to its finish here where it feels like a reasonably built out area and can kind of stand on its own. It also just kind of looks nice in general compared to some of the other areas that are distinctively different from the look. So that will about do it here for our coaster, and next up we're going to just go through and take a look at this at a bit of a real time, and then we're going to toss it back to Andrew for episode number 3. So here we have our fully filled out little landscape here with our junior coaster running through it. I called it Oasis Express, which sort of generic, but also harkens to a old Schwarzkopf coaster that's no longer there, that was in Kuwait, that I always kind of liked the name for and liked the look of. So that's what we're going to roll with. Certainly always open to other suggestions if you guys have them. But we are using our space here fairly well, I think. Nice interaction with the dueling swinging inverter ships. Got a couple little helixes. This is kind of a cool thing over top of the pathway here. And then we got this one that now sits over the water. And then we have our little trench here. And then our final little bump here and into our brakes. Still trying to do at least a little bit of a brake run, even though it's not necessarily a mechanics thing in the game. definitely getting people riding it, which is good news. And from an excitement rating, we are over our 6% here, or our 6 ratings, so we have exactly what we need, and that's going to get us going. So now if we zoom out a little bit, we can kind of see how this fills out some of the space here. And next up, I'm going to toss it back to Andrew, and I am going to suggest that we try a mine train coaster. Not necessarily sure where, but we got some pretty great rocks here that we could use for it. Feels like this one needs to get saved for a kind of a main feature sort of thing, almost a, I guess, a Canada's Wonderland Alpenfury perhaps, or something of that nature. But let's see about a mine train. So toss it back to Andrew. Keep an eye on his channel for the next one. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye now.